So we're very grateful to have Dr. Timothy Howe back with us tonight, and he's going to talk with us about a topic that's near and dear to all of us, whether you know it or not. It's about the microbiome in our gut. We're hearing a lot in the media these days about the microbiome, but he's going to demystify it for us and talk about our gut health. So thank you very much.
We're going to try to anyway. So how big is your gut? It's big. You know, if you compare it to your skin, it's about 15 to 20 times larger in surface area than your skin. In fact, if you took it out and spread it out, it would cover an area about 4 meters wide and 10 meters long. Well, that's like 12 by 30 feet. You know, that's we couldn't get all our microbiomes in this room, that's for sure. I mean our guts in this room. We wouldn't want to get all of our microbiomes on the floor in this room either, but you know, the gut is a really interesting thing. It contains more lymphoid tissue than any other place in our body, and the gut has as many nerves as our spinal cord does. You know, you think, wait a minute, where's my brain? You know, have you ever heard of the thing, a gut feeling or gut wrenching? Those that we always think, well, that's figures of speech. Actually not. That's actually a very accurate anatomic description, because you've got more nerves in your gut than anywhere else except here and in the spinal cord. There's equal numbers. And so when you feel things with your gut, that's really true. We're getting to the microbiome.
Do you have any more?
No, this is mine. But if anyone wants a copy of my notes afterwards, you're welcome to. Cheryl was going to take my notes. Yeah, okay. And there's a real close cooperation between your brain and your gut, and between your feelings and your gut. They all kind of work together. And there's a close connection between your immune system and your gut. Well, you imagine if you have that big of an area, and it's, I mean, the stuff that enters our body mostly goes through our gut. And so you'd want to have a lot of immune cells monitoring that, and sure enough, they do. And the gut has many functions, but there's 3 major ones. First, of course, it digests and absorbs nutrients, and that's what we usually think of. But it also educates and assists the immune system. It tells the immune system what is dangerous and what isn't dangerous, and what to attack and what not to attack. And it modulates brain function and emotional function. Did you know your gut changes your emotions? And if you eat one way, you may have more depression or more anxiety than if you eat another way, based on what's going on in your gut. And so gut feeling really is true. If your gut's not feeling well, neither will you. And there's some really interesting studies on depression and diet based on what's happening in your gut. We've talked before about the close connection between healthy soil, healthy plants, and healthy people. Remember that? If the soil's really healthy, then the plants get the nutrition they need and they can resist diseases. And plants that are really healthy help us resist diseases. I don't know if you know, but there's some really interesting research about diet and COVID. People that are on a whole food, plant-based diet that is high in fiber, they were 50% less likely to get COVID than people that were on a standard American diet. Well, that's almost as good as an immunization, just eating a whole food, plant-based diet. And furthermore, they were 73% lower risk for severe COVID. So even if they got it, it was a 73% lower risk of severe COVID. Well, that sounds real good. But that's true of other viral infections as well, all from the interplay of the microbiome in the gut and our food and what it does to the immune system and our ability to resist infection. So this is very important for us to understand today and in the last couple years here as we've dealt with a very bad epidemic in this country. So it's important for us to realize that what we put into our mouth and how it interacts with the bacteria there is very important. So what is the microbiome? Well, the microbiome is all the cells in your body that aren't you that are working. Now, it makes you wonder for a minute what's me and what isn't me and who am I, because you have more cells in and on your body than you do cells that are you. More cells that aren't you than are you. And you have about 10 times as much DNA that isn't you than is you. You start thinking about that and you say, well, I wonder what I am. Am I really me or am I some of those bugs? Well, fortunately, the majority of the bacteria that are in your mouth and in your gut and on your skin are there to help you. They're not there to harm you. And that's really good news, or we'd be in real trouble. There's estimated to be over 100 trillion cells in the microbiome, and that's about 3 to 10 times the number of human cells. So there's 10 times as much not you as you. Yeah, you feel a little like you're crawling a bit, you know? What's going on here? There it is. So you wonder, how much DNA? Well, you have a lot more DNA that's not your own than is your own in and on your system. Well, what is this microbiome made up of? Well, it's made up of bacteria, and it's made up of archaea. Well, what's that? Well, those are cells without a nucleus. And we don't know a whole lot about them, but there are a lot of them in there. And they're all working away, and they help protect us from disease. And then there are viruses, and you thought all viruses were bad, but they're not. Some are actually helpful to your body. And they're all at work. And then there are fungi, and you thought, well, fungi are bad. Well, some of them are, and they cause problems with your toenails and your skin, but some of them aren't problematic. They can actually be helpful to us. And all these microorganisms are at work down there. That's the microbiome. Well, what about probiotic? Have you ever heard of probiotic? Well, all that really means is pro means for, right? They're the part of the microbiome that's for you. And usually we think of probiotics as you get them out of a bottle, right? But you get them really out of the soil originally. And how many of you have made sauerkraut? Okay, so what do? You take cabbage, or you can do it with beets, and you chop it all up, and then what do? You put salt on it. You don't put vinegar, you put salt on it, and then what do? You put it in a jar and you mash it down, and then you walk away. How do the lactobacillus acidophilus that make it into sauerkraut get in there? They're already on the cabbage when it was growing out in the garden. And they're around in the soil, and they go to work, and you get sauerkraut. And it's really good for you, except for all the salt. But it's got a lot of bacteria that are good for you. And those bacteria come right along with the sauerkraut. And I love sauerkraut. My daughter-in-law makes it for me, and it's really tasty, fresh. So you get those cells from around. You get it from your spouse. Did you know you get about 80 million bacteria with a good kiss. You think about that. You better be careful who you kiss because you want that good microbiome. So that's important. Those are probiotics. Those are the good organisms that aren't you, that are within you and with you, and you carry them around with you. And then there's prebiotics. What are prebiotics? Well, I don't know why we chose that name. We should have just called it food for bacteria, because that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about stuff we eat that feeds the microbiome. And talking about feeding the microbiome, did you know that your microbiome tells you whether or not you're hungry? You thought it was you and lack of willpower, right? No. A lot of your appetite is your microbiome sending a message up to your brain and saying, well, by the way, we haven't had enough food, so get with it and eat some more. It's true. And if you want to lose weight, all you have to do, well, not all, but a major part of losing weight is feeding your microbiome and getting it happy, and then you feel full because it tells you you don't need to eat more. Well, that's good news. My obesity isn't from my lack of willpower, at least not alone. It's also because I haven't been feeding that farm that's growing in me, right? Got to feed all those little beasties down there. There's one more term I'd like to introduce to you, and that's called dysbiosis. Have you ever heard that? Yeah, dysbiosis is when the microbiome isn't balanced and isn't happy. It's cranky, and when your microbiome gets cranky, guess what? You get cranky too. That's exactly right. It's a condition that occurs when the probiotic members of the microbiota are out of balance or reduced in numbers, and that can come after taking antibiotics. Do you know after you take a good course of antibiotics, your microbiome is, to use a medical term, screwed up for about a year and a half, because you've killed the good bacteria as well as the bad ones that were causing the infection in your lung or in your finger or whatever. So we often say, well, you're taking antibiotics. When you're done, take probiotics. Is that a good thing? Yeah, it's a good thing. But it's not as important as going back on a good diet to feed your microbiome to regrow it. That's what you really need to do. So let's just take a look at the gut and where the microbiome is mostly. You start with the mouth, right? That's where stuff goes in. That mouth is crawling with bugs. They're all over the place in there. And I'm telling you, that's not bad if the person's eating a good diet. That's really good. Like I mentioned a little while ago, you get about 80 million bugs with one good kiss. So choose your partners carefully. And then you leave the mouth, you go to the esophagus, and there are a few bacteria there, not a lot. You get to the stomach, a high acid content, not many bacteria. The few that are able to grow there often cause problems. Then you go to the small gut, small bowel, and a few more bacteria, but then you get to the colon, and that's where the major organisms are. The colon is loaded with bacteria, and viruses and archaea and fungi at times, but we'd like to have that balance just right. And if you give your body the right food for your microbiome, then they're so happy, and they make something called short-chain fatty acids. And short-chain fatty acids are made by the part of the microbiome that's really helpful for you, the probiotic microbiome. And those short-chain fatty acids feed your colon cells. They sit there and they say, you know, some for me and some for you, and they share. And when those colon cells get plenty of short-chain fatty acids, they're really happy, particularly if they get butyric acid. They just settle down and they don't get inflamed, and that's why there are much lower levels of inflammatory bowel disease and irritable bowel disease or irritable bowel syndrome in people that have a happy microbiome. Well, how do you feed it? One word: fiber. Fiber. Your microbiome, the healthy part of it, eats fiber. And it doesn't eat just one kind of fiber. It eats the soluble fiber and the insoluble fiber, and it likes fiber from all kinds of things. If you just take Metamucil and eat a regular diet, a standard American diet, your microbiome is not going to be nearly as happy as if you ate what Sheryl made tonight, with all the different kinds of vegetables in it, and all the different colors in it, and the different digestive times. Then your microbiome is going to be really, really happy. And so you want to think about fiber whenever you think about your microbiome. If you want to work with depression or anxiety, you want to think fiber. Those are really important. The higher the fiber in the diet, the less depression and the less anxiety. If you want to think about COVID and reducing your risk, why are you going to eat fiber? Because if you eat fiber, you feed the bacteria fiber, and your body will select for the bacteria that will help your gut be happy. If you eat a lot of eggs and cheese and meat and seafood, you're going to select for a microbiome that's what we call putrefaction bacteria. And if you have a lot of bacteria that putrefy things, then the gut gets inflamed, and then with an inflamed gut, your immune system is turned on and the inflammation goes up, and then when you get COVID, you can't resist the infection, number one, and number two, you get a more severe case. You know, there are a lot of diseases that are related to a dysbiosis. Rheumatoid arthritis is, coronary artery disease is, diabetes is. If you get enough butyric acid because you're eating a high fiber diet, all of the following occur. You'll have better insulin sensitivity, that is less diabetes. You'll have increased energy expenditure by increasing the metabolic rate of the body, resulting in lower rates of obesity. Did you get that? If you eat a high fiber diet and you make more butyric acid, your metabolic rate runs higher. And so there's less obesity. That's amazing. Just by eating more fiber, you can lose weight. I often say to people that are overweight, your problem is you're not eating enough. And that's really true. You need to ramp up the volume of what you eat by increasing the fiber, and that helps with weight loss. If you eat a diet that's high in fiber and your gut is making more butyric acid, it signals the liver to reduce cholesterol production. That's one of the ways that fiber causes you to have a lower blood cholesterol through the butyric acid and liver signaling. The other way is fiber binds cholesterol in the gut, and then you excrete it in the stool. So two mechanisms of cholesterol lowering just by eating more fiber. Another thing that you do is you induce apoptosis of colon cells that are abnormal. That is, if you have a cell that's a little bit abnormal and needs to die because it's heading toward cancer, if you have a high fiber diet making more butyric acid, you're going to have much lower risk of colon cancer. If you look at the population of blacks in Africa that eat a high fiber diet and compare them to blacks in our country, there's about a 50 times lower risk of colon cancer in Africa than there is in our country. Why? Genetics? No. Diet. 50 times reduction based on a high fiber diet. So that happens. You reduce inflammation, which I've talked about. You lower the pH of the colon, and that enhances mineral absorption, particularly of calcium. So a high fiber diet enhances calcium absorption and helps your bones. You tighten the cell junction between cells lining the gut, and that reduces inflammation and the incidence of a leaky gut. And we're seeing lots of problems with leaky guts from not enough fiber. You know, there's some fascinating studies on mice, and they've actually done some in humans now too, where they do a very interesting procedure that I don't want to be part of, but they take a nice, thin, healthy mouse, and they take the stool of that one and give it to the other one as an enema. And if you take a thin mouse and take their stool and give it to a fat mouse as an enema, the fat mouse will lose weight. So now we have a new weight loss program. And it works really well for a while, but if you don't change their diet, they need another poop infusion to keep them losing weight. And it would be much better just to eat a high fiber diet and select for a good microbiome. Unless you really don't want to do that, then we can just give you stool transplants, we'll call it that. So new weight loss program, stool transplant. Anybody want to sign up for it? No, I mean, some of us are really full of it and they'd be good donors, but probably not. It's fascinating what they found though. You know, a stool transplant and you lose weight. Who would have thought of that? Another thing that they found is in students who are taking exams, if you measure their bacteria in their gut, the microbiome, the number of cells, the healthy cells in the gut, can fall by as much as 50% on test day and for 3 to 4 days afterwards. Because mental stress, it works backwards. It affects the microbiome in reverse. Microbiome, when it's really healthy, helps the brain. Brain, when it's really stressed, hurts the microbiome. Who would have thought there's crosstalk between the brain and the gut? But there is. So eat a really healthy diet and don't get stressed. I guess that's it, right? And if you are stressed, eat even more fiber. That's really important. So they did some other studies in mice that I just thought were fascinating. They introduced some of the pathogenic bacteria that you get more of when you're eating a standard American diet, and they found that the mice became more timid and anxious. And then they gave them lactobacillus, and they found that over a 30-day period there were less anxiety in the mice. And they became more courageous. Who would have thought that the bacteria in your gut would do that to you? So eat fiber and take courage, you know. So here's some advice, all right? To improve your, we got there, right? To improve your gut microbiome, reduce the foods which enhance the growth of the putrefaction bacteria. And I mentioned that, that's namely meat and cheese and eggs and seafood and dairy. Now, if you have these occasionally when you're on a really high fiber diet, you can get by and it's not going to hurt you as far as your microbiome, because it takes a week or so to start shifting. You know, the bacteria aren't too much different than we are. If you feed your gut one thing, you'll grow the kind of bacteria that like to eat what you've eaten. If you feed your guts a different thing, you'll grow different bacteria. Now you could say, well, I'm just going to get my probiotics, the right kind, the healthy bacteria out of a bottle. Well, okay, but you're going to have to eat how many billion a day? And remember, most of them, when they go through the stomach, get killed. Not many get through. And it's not nearly as good as feeding the food that the good bacteria like, so that you'll have a really healthy microbiome. That's the most important thing. And then increase the foods which are rich in fiber. And those are grains. You want to eat your grains like quinoa, oats, barley, wheat, Whatever, if you are wheat intolerant, fine, you can have something else. There are lots of grains that are helpful. Buckwheat is good. Fruits. Avocado is rich in fiber, one of the best. Apples, pears, oranges, berries, passion fruit. And then there's beans and greens. Don't forget your beans and greens. They're some of the highest in fiber. People need to eat fiber. The recommended daily allowance for fiber is 20 grams of fiber. The average American gets 10, and I recommend you double the recommended daily allowance and get somewhere between 20 and 30. 30 and 40. So let's look at some food groups and what they contain. Fruit, on average, if you have a half cup, it's about a gram of fiber, 1.5 grams, something like that. There are high fiber fruits. Berries are one of them. I love berries. Get those berries, get those pears, those apples. They're high in fiber. Or eat a good mango, you know, that stringy stuff, that's fiber. And so that's pretty high as well. Dark green vegetables, a half a cup instead of 1.5 grams, has 6.4 grams of fiber. So get those dark green vegetables. That's a lot of fiber, 6.5 grams of fiber in a half a cup. Or eat a whole cup. That's even better. Eat some of my wife's kale salad. Now, I can eat about 3 cups of that. And if you ate 3 cups of that, well, then you'd have 18 or 19 grams of fiber, and that's a good start. Orange vegetables like sweet potatoes, there's about 2 grams of fiber in a half a cup. Cooked beans, 8 grams of fiber. So a half cup of cooked beans, 8 grams of fiber. Now we're talking some happy microbiome and healthy body and courage. You know, eat those beans. Maine was built on beans, wasn't it? That's why they had to spread out. Leave room. Starchy vegetables like potatoes have about 1.7 grams of fiber. Meat has less than 1/10 of a gram of fiber. There's some, but very, very little. So then you want to get into flax. 2 tablespoons of flax, 6 grams of fiber. 2 tablespoons of chia seeds, 8 grams of fiber. So you can get a lot of fiber easily if you think about it. And then your gut will be really happy. I thought for fun I would add up how much fiber I had for breakfast. So I measured my breakfast, and I eat a good breakfast because I don't know if I'm going to eat again during the day. Sometimes, unfortunately, they make me work right through lunch seeing people. I don't know how that happens, but so this morning I had a cup of homemade granola. You know, that's rolled oats. We roll them, and then we add some walnuts to it and raisins to it, and it's good. I'm going to go home and have some, I think. That cup of homemade granola had 6 grams, and then I put on top actually a little more, but I didn't want to put how much, so I just said a cup of 6-grain cereal that had 7 grams of fiber, and then I had 1 cup of soy milk that had 2 grams of fiber, and then I added 2 tablespoons of flax meal because that flax meal is good for you. It'll lower your blood pressure. It'll lower your risk, men, of prostate cancer. Women, it'll lower your risk of breast cancer. It'll lower your cholesterol, and it's good for arthritis. Can you name a drug that'll do all those things? Add your flax. It had 6 grams of fiber, and then I had a tablespoon of pumpkin seeds. Pumpkin seeds are really good for men. It lets you sleep through the night. I'll just leave it at that. That's 1 gram of fiber. And then I like to have a little bit of applesauce with berries and cherries, and I got another 2 grams there. And then I had a mango, and that had 5 grams. So I added it all up. I got 29 grams of fiber for breakfast, and that was a good start. And I knew I had to get a lot of fiber because, you get to lunch, and what did they do today at work? Well, they wanted me to eat a picnic lunch from Panera, of all things. And usually I get a lot more fiber than I got today. But I got my 29 grams already, and so that's a good start toward it, and probably got about 4 or 5 more grams. So I'm into the 30-plus range, and that's where you want to be. and then your microbiome's good, and then you can resist COVID, and if you get it, it won't be severe, and then you won't get depressed and anxious, and all these good things just from feeding your microbiome. Any questions?
Where do dried prunes read?
Oh, dried prunes are great. Dried prunes are great for a lot of reasons. They have a compound in them that we call the power behind the throne. And they keep things moving right along. And, but they have a fair amount of fiber. You don't think about eating a half cup of prunes, though, but they're not as high as the grains and as the greens. But they're a good source of fiber. I recommend prunes. I love prunes. Some people have accused me of being a prune, but anyway, any other questions? Yes, go ahead.
Cabbage?
Cabbage, it's like a dark green. I would recommend red cabbage, or purple. Cheryl had that in. Why? Because there are more antioxidants in. Go for the rainbow whenever you can, but cabbage is a great source of fiber. Yeah.
The other part of the question was, I'm sure you've heard of it, but kimchi?
Kimchi is sauerkraut gone wild. It's cabbage, and it has good fiber in it as well, and it's a good source of probiotics if it's not gone too far. But I go for sauerkraut. Yeah. Yes, question.
So I recently read about the oral microbiome, about how important it is, that to avoid mouthwash.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea to avoid mouthwash because you're killing the bacteria. What you want to do is have a healthy microbiome, and the way you do that in the gut, in the mouth, is to avoid a lot of sugar. Because if you eat a lot of sugar, you're going to select for a more inflammatory microbiome in your mouth, and then you're going to get more dental caries. And I do recommend brushing your teeth, but I wouldn't use a toxic toothpaste. Even if you just use a brush without toothpaste, it's surprising what that'll do for your teeth and your gums as well. Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
Is it true that with the flax seeds that it is better to buy the whole flax seed and then before you want to eat, you grind it?
Okay, the question is, shall we eat our flaxseed ground or whole? And if you get it ground, should you grind your own? Grind your own if you can, or buy the flaxseed, open the package, and afterwards store it in the refrigerator, because it will go rancid, and you don't want that to happen. I grind mine fresh. Usually every week I grind a new batch and then put it in the refrigerator. The best way I think to grind it is in a coffee grinder. Then you can rename that a flax grinder, and it'll work just fine. Chia seeds don't have to be ground because they gel up pretty fast, but flax seeds, if you don't grind them, they'll go in and they'll go out, and the bacteria won't get much chance to enjoy them. And then you won't either. Yes,
How
Jess?
about smoothies? Do you get a lot of fiber in smoothies?
It depends on what you put in the smoothie. But if you put flax in and kale and that sort of thing, you can ramp up the fiber quite high. And smoothies are really important to eat for people that don't have teeth. The rest of us should probably chew our food, because there's a little counter up in your brain that counts how many times you chew, and then you don't tend to overeat. If you're underweight or if you have problems chewing your food, smoothies are great. But if you're overweight, better to eat real food and chew it. Although smoothies taste great. I love them.
What about yogurt?
Yogurt. It's a great source of Lactobacillus acidophilus, and I don't have a problem with yogurt. It's a great thing. Another thing that I sort of mentioned at the beginning and then dropped was reverse starch. Reverse starch is not fiber per se, but it's a starch that you can't digest in the upper gut that's digested in the lower gut and works very well as a prebiotic. Potatoes and pasta, if you cook them and then chill them, some of that starch becomes a reverse starch and actually feeds your microbiome. Green bananas the same, and foods that contain inulin, of which what I mentioned, Jerusalem artichokes are very high in inulin. That's not digested in your upper gut, doesn't do you a bit of good until it gets to the colon. The bacteria munch on that and love it, and then they feed you those short-chain fatty acids, and that can be really helpful.
With the yogurt, you want to be really careful about the sugar.
Yeah.
Because a lot of yogurts have sugar, and then there are non-dairy yogurts. And if you choose the non-dairy yogurt, then you're not going to have to deal with some of the issues related to the dairy, which we've talked about in other programs.
Yeah, I recommend a non-dairy, non-sweetened yogurt. And my wife makes a fruit soup with no sugar added, using honey and some other things that when my grandchildren come, they're like little pigs at a trough. They just eat that and eat that and eat that. And she used to make a double recipe. Now she makes a quadruple recipe. And they just love it. And it's good for their microbiomes, especially because she adds berries and other things that are high in fiber to it. And then some mint leaves. And I think I'm going to go home and get some. Jess.
What about the other stuff in, like I buy almond
Milk?
Almond unsweetened yogurt.
Yeah.
It has other stuff in it.
Well, I'd have to look at the ingredients to know about the other stuff. I tend to I look at the grams of fiber in the yogurt, and of course there's none in dairy. There is some in soy. Actually, soy milk is fairly high in fiber, and the other plant milks aren't quite as high. And so I'm always looking to add fiber because I want to be courageous.
They don't make unsweetened soy anymore.
Yeah, they do. They make unsweetened soy milk. Silk.
Not yogurt.
No, but not yogurt. Yeah, you have to be careful with yogurts.
Yes, you
Yeah.
can get unsweetened yogurt.
Okay,
Yeah.
check with Cheryl.
'Cause
I
that's
don't
what
shop
get.
enough.
That's the only one I get. I get it at Hannaford, and I get it at Morning Glory. Silk is a manufacturer of one. There's another one that starts with an F. I forget the name of it, but there are some. Also, a couple people asked about kimchi and what's the thing you
Sauerkraut.
Sauerkraut. So you want to be careful with that and make sure that there's no vinegar in it. A lot of kimchi and a lot of sauerkraut in the regular grocery store has vinegar in it, and that's going to kill most of your pre and probiotics.
Yeah.
So you want to get that which is called lacto-fermented. That means that it's just in the brine that is the liquid from the cabbage or the beets or whatever, and salt. There's no vinegar added to it.
The
And you can
reason
get that
they add
anywhere.
vinegar is they don't want to go through the process of allowing the lactobacillus to acidify the product, because it takes longer and it's more labor intensive and fussy. And the other thing is, if it's canned, there's no bacteria that are alive in it. It has to be fresh, and the best way is make your own. It's really not hard. I thought it was hard. It's not. And it sure tastes good.
Yeah, it's really good.
I'd share some, but I like it too much.
There is a local manufacturer. It's called Gracie's Garden, and it comes in a jar, but it's fresh. It's not canned, so you find it in the refrigerated section. I get mine at our local natural food store. Farmers Market has it too.
And whenever you can, get that purple cabbage sauerkraut or beets or something like that. Oh, that's good. But remember, it's not the probiotics you eat that makes a difference. It's the fiber that you eat that keeps the probiotics that are already there and growing really happy. You're not going to get a good microbiome out of a bottle of pills. It isn't going to happen. I do recommend them if you're taking a bunch of antibiotics. You got to start somewhere, but don't end there. Yeah. Question.
People mention kale all the time as one of the favorite greens. Is it that much better than collards or spinach?
It's not that much better than collards. It's a little better than spinach. But I don't care what kind of dark green you'll eat it. whatever it is. I don't care if it's lamb's quarter, kale, collards, kohlrabi, I really, broccoli, eat them. Whatever you can tolerate. I didn't used to, kale, I don't want it unless it's had a good frost or it's in my wife's kale salad. Once you get a good frost on kale, it sweetens up and oh, you can't get enough of it. Before that, it's kind of bitter unless you let her make it into a salad. Then
We use a lot of frozen collard greens.
oh, that's great. And remember, when you can't get the fresh, frozen are fine, because frozen you only lose about 10% of the nutritive value when they're frozen. The other thing with frozen greens is you don't have to cook them, just let them thaw. I found that out with my lunches. I'll often take broccoli in my lunch. I don't cook it, I just let it thaw in my lunch bag, and then it's perfect when lunchtime comes. And you get more nutrients that way. All right, well, thank you very much, and don't forget to get your sample.